When my husband told me I wasn't polished enough to attend his company's luxury gala, I didn't argue, I just smiled. Because one day, I knew I'd own the room he thought I didn't belong in. Before we dive in, tell me in the comments where you're from. I love seeing how far these stories reach. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe because this one gets messy. Grant Mercer, my husband, the man everyone called a visionary, was once my partner in every sense. I helped him build Mercer Dynamics from the ground up. Late nights in our garage, cheap coffee, and dreams too big for the space we worked in. But the moment success came knocking, he started changing the locks. By the time invitations went out for the company's annual gala, I wasn't even on the list. He told me, with that fake sweet tone he used when he was about to twist the knife, "It's just a high-profile event, Alara. You know how the board can be. It's better for the company image if I go alone." Translation: I wasn't the right accessory. I nodded like it didn't burn. I even helped him pick his tie, the one that matched his intern's dress, though he swore it was just coincidence. When he left, I sat on the couch, still in the dress I'd bought for the night, staring at the untouched bottle of champagne we'd once promised to share when we made it big. Hours later, the gala aired live on TV. I watched him smiling, shaking hands, and laughing beside her, Ava the intern. Young, sharp, beautiful, exactly the kind of woman he used to say he'd never be caught dead with. Cameras flashed around them, and for a moment, it looked like I'd never existed. I should have cried. But I didn't. I just turned the volume down, leaned back, and memorized the way he looked under those lights, so sure, so smug, so unaware. In that quiet room, surrounded by everything I'd built but no longer recognized, I whispered a promise to myself. One day, he'd regret underestimating me. One day, the same people who laughed at me for not belonging would stand and applaud when I walked into the room he'd kept me out of. That night wasn't the end of my humiliation. It was the start of my revenge. I used to think love and business could coexist. Back in that cramped garage, it was just us, two dreamers running on caffeine and ambition. I built the systems, coded the processes, managed the chaos while Grant sold the vision. It worked. Until it didn't. When the first investors arrived, they wanted polish, charm, confidence, and Grant delivered. He started dressing differently, talking differently, even laughing in a tone that didn't sound like him anymore. The man who once thanked me for every spreadsheet now introduced my ideas as his own. I told myself it didn't matter who got the credit as long as we were building something together. That lie held me together longer than it should have. Then one night, while sorting through old company files, I noticed something strange. My name appeared on legal documents I didn't remember signing. Pages transferring my co-founder shares to Grant. The signature looked right, almost perfect, but I knew my own handwriting better than anyone. My stomach dropped. I spent hours comparing timestamps, cross-checking emails, and tracing where the documents had gone. Everything pointed to one truth. He'd done it years ago, before the company even turned a profit. He hadn't just taken my recognition. He'd taken my ownership. I sat there staring at my name forged in ink, realizing I no longer existed in the company I helped create. The humiliation from the gala had hurt, but this was something else. It wasn't just betrayal, it was erasure. When he walked in later that night, smiling, asking if I'd seen the news coverage of his big event, I just nodded. He kissed my forehead, completely unaware of what I knew. I didn't confront him. I couldn't, not yet. I started copying files, storing documents in hidden drives, and backing up everything he might try to bury. Every keystroke felt like a heartbeat, steady and cold. I wasn't ready to fight him, but I was done pretending we were on the same side. That night, as he slept beside me, I opened my laptop one last time and created a new folder. Rebuild. Not just a project name, but a promise. Noah Price had always been the one person I could still trust. We hadn't talked much since he left the firm, but when I called and told him I needed help, he didn't hesitate. His office smelled like paper and stress, the kind of place where truth lived quietly between legal pads and coffee stains. I handed him the files I'd found. He didn't even need 10 minutes before his expression hardened. "These signatures aren't yours, Alara," he said flatly. "They're clean forgeries." He must have had them notarized using falsified ID. Hearing it from a lawyer made it real in a way my suspicions never could. I wanted to march home and confront Grant right then, but Noah stopped me. "You can't go after him yet," he warned. "He'll twist this around before you even hit court. You need leverage, proof of intent, financial misconduct, anything that shows motive." His words hit like a wall. I realized I was fighting a man who'd already rewritten the story to make himself the hero. So I started working quietly, like a ghost inside my own life. I combed through company emails, cross-referenced transactions, traced silent transfers between shell accounts. Patterns started forming, money moving through names I didn't recognize, expenses disguised as consulting fees. He wasn't just greedy, he was preparing an escape route. One document stopped me cold, a confidential memo about a pending acquisition. Grant was negotiating to sell Mercer Dynamics to an international conglomerate. Once that deal closed, everything tied to my name, my work, my history, would vanish in the fine print. He'd walk away richer, and I'd be erased forever. The rage I expected never came. Instead, something steadier took its place, clarity. I realized that rage would only give him more power, and I'd already given enough. So I moved methodically, collecting files, recording calls, documenting every small inconsistency. At night, when he sat across from me at dinner, I matched his smile with one of my own. He thought I was breaking under the weight of silence, but I was learning the rhythm of his deceit. Every lie he told became another piece of my plan. It wasn't revenge I wanted anymore. It was balance, and I was patient enough to wait for it. Grant changed tactics once he sensed a shift in me. Suddenly, every conversation became a performance. He spoke gently, almost pitying, telling me I should talk to someone about my trust issues. It was his favorite weapon, make me doubt my own sanity. He said it so often, I started to wonder if he believed it himself. He began parading Ava around more openly, inviting her to dinners under the excuse of company matters. She laughed too loudly at his jokes, touched his arm like she belonged there. And he'd glance at me, waiting for a reaction, always with that faint smirk that said, "See how easily I can replace you?" Instead of rising to it, I smiled. That unsettled him more than anger ever could. I started letting him believe he was winning. I played the quiet wife again, agreeable, apologetic, small. I nodded through his explanations about business and image. When he spoke down to me, I looked away, pretending the sting still reached me. But behind the mask, I was collecting everything. Noah and I met discreetly, away from prying eyes. We discussed how to make every move count. I began recording our conversations at home. Nothing illegal, just enough to capture his arrogance. It didn't take long before he slipped. One night, with a glass of whiskey in hand, he bragged about signing things she'll never even find. His voice was smooth, careless, soaked in confidence. I didn't flinch. I just saved the file. At home, silence became its own kind of language. Breakfast stretched longer, the clink of cutlery louder than any argument. He'd scroll through his phone, pretending not to notice I was watching. I'd sip my coffee, pretending not to notice his guilt. Every gesture felt rehearsed, every word chosen. We were actors trapped in a marriage that had turned into a chess match. He believed he was still in control, that I was too fragile to fight back. I let him think that. He wanted me confused, small, dependent. But I was done being his mirror. While he practiced manipulation, I mastered patience. Each day I stayed silent was another step toward the moment he'd realize he'd trained me to beat him at his own game. I waited for the right morning to leave. Calm skies, no witnesses, no tears. I told Grant I needed space, that I was overwhelmed and just wanted time to clear my head. He barely looked up from his laptop. A smug grin tugged at his mouth. "Don't drag this out, Alara," he said, voice dripping with mock concern. "You'll never win against me." I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. Words had become weapons he controlled too well. So I simply zipped my suitcase, took one last look at the man who thought I was retreating, and walked out. Every item I packed had purpose: documents, drives, a small flash of insurance against the storm he didn't see coming. I didn't take jewelry, photos, or anything sentimental. Just proof. Quietly, precisely gathered proof. Outside, I exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. The air didn't feel lighter, but it felt real. I wasn't escaping him. I was stepping into the beginning of his downfall. Within hours, Noah filed the injunction. It moved fast, locked tight under confidentiality. Grant wouldn't even know until his precious sale collapsed in front of him. While he was busy charming buyers, I was cutting off his exits. Noah reached out to the people who remembered how Mercer Dynamics really began. Investors who'd seen my name on the original blueprints, early employees who knew who built the systems that kept the company alive. Piece by piece, the version of history Grant had sold to the world started to unravel. At night, I stayed in a small rental apartment overlooking the city lights. It wasn't home, but it was mine. I watched the skyline where his office stood, glowing with power he thought was permanent. He had no idea his empire was already cracking from the inside. I didn't feel victory yet, only a strange stillness, like the moment before a storm finally breaks. The silence wasn't emptiness anymore. It was strategy. Grant believed I'd left to lick my wounds. What he didn't realize was that I'd taken the one thing he couldn't steal, control. And now, it was my turn to decide how loud his world would fall apart. Weeks passed before the cracks finally split wide open. The sale that was supposed to make Grant untouchable collapsed overnight. Investors pulled out, citing unresolved legal complications. He didn't understand how it had happened. Every call he made ended with confusion. Every email came back unanswered. His confidence, once loud enough to fill a room, started to sound like panic. When my phone rang that evening, I already knew who it was. His voice came through sharp and frantic. "What did you do, Alara? You ruined my life." I could almost picture him pacing in that glass office, his perfect image shattering behind him. I let a beat of silence stretch before answering softly. "Oh? I thought I didn't belong in your world." He cursed under his breath, demanding explanations, but I didn't give him any satisfaction. "I'm just protecting what's mine," I said evenly. "I've filed to reinstate my ownership. Everything you took, I'm taking back, legally." The silence on his end was heavier than any insult he could have thrown. For once, he had no words. The board had already started whispering before I called him. Now those whispers were turning into meetings. They questioned his decisions, his spending, his secrecy. The same people who once worshipped his charm were beginning to see the arrogance underneath. A few even reached out quietly to me, asking for clarity about the company's origins. I gave them facts, no drama, no emotion, just the truth he'd buried for years. Behind the polished walls of Mercer Dynamics, alliances shifted. Reports circulated, internal audits were ordered, and Grant's once loyal supporters began distancing themselves. He tried to rally them, but the shine was gone. They'd seen the weakness he'd tried so hard to hide. For the first time, I didn't feel small in his shadow. I didn't need to shout or gloat. I'd spent years letting him underestimate me, and that underestimation had become my greatest weapon. When the call ended, I didn't smile. I just closed my phone and looked out the window, watching the city lights flicker. Somewhere in that skyline, his empire was starting to crumble, and I didn't have to lift a finger to push it further. It was already falling on its own. The boardroom felt colder than usual, the kind of chill that doesn't come from air conditioning but from anticipation. Every seat was filled, every face tight with curiosity and unease. Grant sat at the head of the table, still clinging to that confident grin, though the tension in his jaw betrayed him. I walked in calmly, a folder tucked under my arm, the one that held everything he'd tried to hide. When they asked me to speak, I didn't raise my voice. I simply laid out the facts. Dates, signatures, digital trails, each piece fitting neatly into the next. Then came the recording, his own voice admitting to signing things she'd never find. The room went silent. Papers stopped rustling. Even the clock seemed to pause. I showed them my original system designs, blueprints with my name and timestamps older than the company's official registration. Every detail proved what he'd stolen. When I looked up, no one could meet my eyes, not out of pity, but out of shame for ever believing his version. Grant's face changed fast. First disbelief, then fury. He slammed a hand on the table, shouting that it was all manipulation, that I was trying to destroy him. But the more he spoke, the worse it got. His mask slipped with every word. The charm he'd built his empire on vanished, replaced by the raw arrogance that had always lived underneath. The board chair leaned back, expression unreadable. "Mr. Mercer, this behavior is unacceptable," he said finally. A motion was raised, and hands lifted one by one. The vote was unanimous. Grant was suspended pending full investigation. For a moment, I couldn't move. The man who once told me I'd never win was being escorted out of the very room he used to rule. He avoided my gaze as he passed, jaw tight, pride shattered. I gathered my papers quietly, thanked the board for their time, and walked out before the adrenaline could catch up to me. In the hallway, my hands trembled, but not from fear, just the weight of everything it had taken to reach this point. I didn't smile or cry. I just breathed steady and free, for the first time in years. News of Grant's suspension spread through the company faster than any official memo could. By morning, his access had been revoked, his accounts frozen, and the man who once ruled with effortless charm was suddenly unreachable. Whispers filled every hallway, rumors about misused funds, secret accounts, and in turn everyone had pretended not to notice. Ava's name came up too often, her messages found in the company inboxes she thought were private. The image Grant built so carefully was collapsing in full view. I didn't take satisfaction in watching it fall apart. There wasn't time for that. The board named me interim head almost immediately, and the first days were chaos, panic in the departments, client trust hanging by a thread. I worked quietly, one issue at a time, rebuilding what had been broken. People who once dismissed me began knocking on my office door for guidance. The same managers who'd ignored my opinions now asked for direction. It wasn't pride that kept me steady, it was duty. Mercer Dynamics had been poisoned by his ego, and I refused to let that be its legacy. Still, late at night when the office emptied and the noise faded, the victory felt hollow. I'd taken back what was mine, but the cost was heavier than I'd expected. Every success reminded me of how much had been taken before I ever fought back. One evening, after a long meeting, I drove past the old house, the one that used to hold our laughter, the smell of coffee, the plans we made before ambition turned cruel. I let myself in with the spare key still hidden under the step. The place was stripped bare, the walls echoing with silence. I walked through each room, touching the edges of furniture we'd chosen together, now gone. There were faint marks on the floor where my desk used to stand, the same one where the company's first ideas were born. I thought victory would fill the emptiness. Instead, it just made it clearer. I'd rebuilt the business, but some parts of me would always stay in that empty house, standing in the shadow of everything I'd lost to win. A full year had passed since the boardroom battle that changed everything. The company had a new name now, Quinn Dynamics, clean, simple, honest. The gala that once symbolized my humiliation was back, but this time, the invitations carried my signature. The ballroom shimmered with light, cameras flashing as guests arrived, though the energy felt different, rooted in respect, not spectacle. I entered without hesitation, the soft rustle of my black gown blending with the music. The whispers followed me, not in judgment but admiration. I had rebuilt the firm, restored its reputation, and turned it into something real. Yet, even with success surrounding me, a quiet unease lingered. Tonight wasn't about triumph, it was about closure. As speeches began and laughter filled the room, a shadow at the entrance caught my eye. Grant. Thinner now, clothes rumpled, confidence gone. He shouldn't have been there, but of course, he couldn't stay away. He moved through the crowd like a ghost searching for a past that no longer existed. When our eyes met, the noise around us blurred. For a second, it felt like the old days, the pull of recognition, the ache of what once was. But the illusion broke quickly. His bitterness clung to him like smoke. He stepped closer, his voice low, roughened by defeat. You stole my life. I didn't flinch. My tone stayed calm, almost kind. No, Grant, I said softly, meeting his eyes. I just took back what was mine. He looked at me for a long moment, as if waiting for anger or apology. There was none. Just the quiet truth between us, the reversal of everything he'd built on lies. When security finally approached, he didn't resist. He simply turned away, a man watching his reflection fade. As the crowd resumed its rhythm, I exhaled, letting the weight of the past slip off my shoulders. The room that once made me feel small now felt like it belonged to me. I lifted a glass, not to celebrate him or even revenge, but to honor survival. The kind that comes not from fury, but from finally standing where you were always meant to be. The room hushed as I stepped onto the stage, lights softening against the glass walls that framed the city skyline. It wasn't nerves that filled me this time, it was peace. A year ago, I'd watched this same event from a distance, excluded and unseen. Tonight, I stood before my team, the people who helped rebuild what once crumbled under someone else's greed. I began slowly, speaking about endurance, about what it means to start over when everything has been taken from you. I didn't mention names, didn't point fingers. I didn't need to. Everyone in that room already knew the story, the truth woven through the company's rebirth. Integrity isn't about perfection, I said, voice steady. It's about the choice to do what's right even when it costs you everything. Resilience isn't loud. It's the quiet decision to stand back up when you're told you don't belong. Faces across the crowd softened, employees, partners, investors. All of them part of a company built on honesty again. For a moment, the past felt distant, like a bad dream finally fading. I saw pride in their eyes, not for me, but for what we had created. Somewhere near the back, movement caught my attention. Security was guiding someone toward the exit, Grant. His head hung low, his presence a shadow against the brightness of the night. I didn't let my gaze follow. He no longer held any power in my story. His downfall wasn't my triumph. It was just the end of a long, necessary chapter. The applause rose, a sound that filled every corner of the hall. It wasn't the noise of victory, but of acknowledgement, a shared understanding that something broken had been rebuilt stronger. I smiled, feeling the weight finally lift. As the ovation swelled, I let my eyes drift across the room, the people, the company, the dream that had once been stolen and was now truly mine. My voice softened into the microphone, the words more to myself than anyone else. "Funny thing, Grant," I said quietly, almost like a secret carried on the applause. "I guess I finally belonged after all. Do you think I made the right move by walking away and taking back what was mine, or should I have forgiven him? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.